The slaves from West Africa were taken to America and Europe.
All the slaves.
Who were sold here, they never returned. East Africa slave trade was made by the Arabs from Oman. This building here was a hospital. This is the first hospital in Zanzibar. It was built 1885-87. But the hospital building was put on top of slave chamber. They say there were several chambers around here, the slave market. This was the only one that remains, and it was preserved by building a building on top of it, just to preserve one of these slave chambers. So let's go in and see. In here we have two rooms. On my right hand side, this room was for men slaves, and on my left hand side, this room for women and children.
This one over here for male.
This for men slaves,
For men
about 50 slaves at a time, and this female and children about 75 at a time.
This one for female and children.
Slaves were tied in here. No food, just brown sugar and water to survive. Of course, they stayed here for 3 days to wait for the auction, because they had an auction there in the market maybe 2 times or 3 times in a week. So you have to wait for auctioning. So they put here to store them for. They put in here women and children, about 75 at a time. Slaves were chained. No food, just brown sugar and water to survive. The windows for ventilation, and these pillars and the ceiling was just put to hold the building, but the rooms were covered with thatch leaves of the coconut tree, and they stayed here for 2 to 3 days waiting for the auction that happened at the slave market. Many slaves died in here for suffocation and hunger, and these chambers were just adjacent to the seashore. As you know, that the sea was from Hotel ya Mwani there to Mnazi Moja. That's where the sea separates from this part of Stone Town to that Nambo. So they were just adjacent to the seashore.
And we see the chain here. What are these chains for?
These chains show that the slaves here were chained. Even they were in the rooms, slaves were chained in shackles and chains. And this place for the guardian with the gun who keep guard for the slaves.
And they were trapped here, enclosed. How do they get fresh air down here, and how do they survive?
They use those ventilation. 3 there, another 2 over there, that they use for ventilation. And as I said, 75 here, 50 there, so 125 altogether. Sometimes they are 50, sometimes they are 70, sometimes they are 20, sometimes they are 30. It depends, because not all the slaves who were taken from Bagamoyo, they reached Zanzibar. Some died in the sea, they were thrown into the sea. Sometime when they arrived here, they arrived maybe 100. Some are taken to the marketplace. They were bought. Some are put in the store to store them for the next auction. So it depends. Sometimes 50, sometimes 25, 60. And children, it depends. Sometimes we have many children, we have few women, or we have many women, few children. And they don't have food, they don't have water. Sorry, they don't have food, no toilet. Many died in diseases and suffocation.
We see it's just like a tunnel.
Mhm.
Do this place just have water with the slave or not?
The rooms were empty. These were put just to support the walls. These were put later on. These were put later on, but it was an empty room and covered, sheltered with a roof of coconut leaves. Uh, and they were adjacent to the seashore. Sometimes when it is high tide, the water comes in. When it's low tide, the water goes off, cleans the rooms. It was just like that.
Okay. In the caravan of slave, there are men, women, and children. Do the children who are being sold to you?
It depends. Um, Children from 5, 6, 7, 10, 12, yes, they were sold together. If you have a baby, maybe 2 years, 3 years, 4 years, if you buy a woman slave with the child, when you buy a mother, automatically you have bought a baby too, so you take with him. Some they don't want baby, they keep the baby and you take the mother.
Okay. And where are all the slave comes from?
The slaves come from mainland in the continent of Africa, in the southern and central part of Africa, as far from South Africa, from Zimbabwe, from Zambia, from Malawi, from Mozambique, from Tanganyika, Congo, DRC, Central Africa, Uganda, and Kenya. All this part of Africa, they collected as far from those places and were brought. There were two routes: the southern route that goes to the south, and central route that goes to the middle, to Kigoma, to DRC, to Central Africa.
And who were the great slave traders?
In East Africa, the greatest slave traders were Arabs, and the notorious slave trader was Tip Tip, who was half Arab and half African.
Tip Tip. Who is Tip Tip? Just shortly.
Tip Tip was a slave trader here in Zanzibar, a notorious slave trader, and also he owned some big farms, cloth farm here in Zanzibar. He is very famous in Zanzibar in slave trade and with ivory.
Was he Zanzibarian or Arabs?
He's half Zanzibarian, half Arab.
And what you mean when you say like Arab, like which country, like Oman?
Oman.
Okay.
In Zanzibar, we have Arabs from Oman as well. We have Arab from Iran. The Arabs from Iran were the first to arrive here in Zanzibar. They arrived maybe in the 9th or 10th century. And but the Arab from Iran, they didn't do any political or slave trade. They just lived by themselves with their hammams and some of the building and mosques. And then the Arabs from Oman came. They came political. For instance, the Sultan of Oman made Zanzibar as his capital city, and he fought against the Portuguese, and the Arabs won the war between Portuguese and Arabs from Oman.
And who were the buyers?
Mm.
Who were the buyers who bought
The
slaves?
slave trader was mostly the Arabs, but there are um, some of the slaves were taken to India. Some were taken from India or from Arabia countries to Europe.
I have another question. There is a saying people say, like if you go to Senegal, there is something like this building. They call it point of no return. So in Zanzibar, so it means this is point of no return for slaves.
Yes, in Zanzibar, some of the slaves were used domestically here in Zanzibar. Some were taken to these stone town buildings, working domestically. There are some Arabs who owned slaves here in Zanzibar. And later on, they were freed. And most of the slaves who were sold here in the slave market were taken to Arabian countries, and some to India, and some to Madagascar. Yes, this was a point of no return for all the slaves who were sold from here.
So it means all the slaves.
Who were sold here, they never returned.
Okay, so as you say, I mean those slaves, I mean were taken like only like from East Africa to Arab countries.
To
They
Arabian
never
country, to Iran, to India.
they never take I mean slave from here to Europe
No,
or to America.
direct, no, no. There are slaves from, we had slave trade both in West Africa and East Africa. The slaves from West Africa were taken to America and Europe. This is another slave trade, and it was abolished earlier. But in East Africa, slave trade was made by the Arabs from Oman, and they were taken to Arabian, to Indian, to some were used locally here in Zanzibar, some to Madagascar, to Mauritius, and perhaps from there they were taken to Europe.
Okay.
Okay, and in Zanzibar we heard there is prison island. Was it a prison for slave, and was it connected to slave market here?
No, no. Actually, it was not a prison as per se. It was the Sultan of that time. He dedicated that for if the visitors come to Zanzibar before they enter to Zanzibar Island, they were quarantined there for some time. If they because during that time there was smallpox and some other cholera and many diseases, so they dedicated there so that to stay there for quarantine, and from there they were brought in. So that's why they called Prison Island. It was not a per se as a prison, and it has nothing connected to the slave trade. Slave trade began earlier in 15th century, I can say, and it was introduced by the Portuguese. And the first slave market was not here; it was near Serena. Then, when slave trade was become a very big, business in Zanzibar, then they shift from there to this slave market, which was the biggest slave market here in Kunazini.
After the abolishment of slave trade, are there some slaves that were sold here? So where did they go? They just were left free, or they just remained to their lords?
After the slave trade was abolished, still these slave traders were continue to catch slaves and to sell slaves here in Zanzibar illegally in a hiding place. That's why you find Mangapwani, where there's the caves where they hide the slaves, and also some of these dhows came secretly, and they were still sold. And actually, slave trade was completely end in 1920s or 1919s. So the British government used their 9 warships to fight illegal slave trade. All these dhows, which were called slaves, the slaves were freed, and the missionary, they bought a big land at Mbweni. That was the bishop, which I talked, the second bishop of UMCA, George William Tozer, bought a big land at Mbweni. It was about 100 hectares, and he bought at Kiungani there. He built a school. So all these free slaves were taken to Kiungani. For boys, they took them to Kiungani, they studied there, and for girls were taken to Bweni, St. Mary's there, that's in Bweni ruins, and also there were a village for the free slaves. And most of these slaves were taught religion, they were baptized, and became the first Christians of Zanzibar at Bweni. And in one time, Bishop Edward Steer, he tried to take about 200 free slaves to return to mainland, but he went as far to Masasi. They ended there. Misha,
There is one more question.
please.
As we know, that there is a country, they call it Cape Verde or Cape Verde. I think it's Western Africa and Malawi, because Portuguese went there and they forced them to speak their language. I mean, that's why like 90% of Cape Verdean people they speak Portuguese. They call Portuguese Creole, and Malawi they speak Portuguese, like per se, period. So what about here, like in Zanzibar, they speak any language, like Portuguese or Arabic language or English language, or what kind of language they introduce?
The Portuguese came to Zanzibar in 1540, 40, 41, 42, 45, something like that. But at the same time, the Arabs came. So the Portuguese, they didn't stay longer here in Zanzibar. But what they did, they built this fort, the old fort. They built the port there. But as I said, there was a war between the Portuguese and the Arabs in 1548-49, and the Portuguese were conquered by the Arabs. So they escaped to Mozambique and to Angola. That's why we don't have much marks of the Portuguese in Zanzibar, only the bullfight, some words of Swahili, and you have old fort, because they were chased by the Arabs.
We have just got a rich history here, a plenty of explanations, so good. So if one wanna visit here, how can he just contact you?
Okay, my name is late Colonel James Philip Kaledza. My telephone number is 0654.
Hold on, it's plus 255. This is a code from Tanzania. Plus 255. Go ahead.
654-656833. But also, if you come to visit here, you can come anytime from 8 a.m. to 6 p.m. You can buy your ticket. You can, when you buy a ticket, you are supposed to get a guide to take you around. But also, there are exhibition room here where you can read all this history of slave trade by yourself. There are several panels there written both in Swahili and in English language where you can learn by yourself.
Okay, thank you for your time.
Thank you. Mtoto nikupa vipande vya taarifa
Kwa nani tu?